right? Yes. It was the main artery through Butte to the Butte mines on the hill, and it included the Parrot, the Sweat, the Anaconda, the High Ore, the Mountain View Speculator, Bell, the Diamond, and many others, in addition to the neighborhoods that were up in that area. It wound uphill to the east and then further up around north. And part of it now would be in the Berkeley pit. It came out down around where the road going into the Granite Mountain Speculator disaster is. That was part of the Anaconda Road. It went all the way around, basically where the Lexington is. It came down and around. It was said that the miners could be heard singing as they went to and fro to the mines, mostly the Irish. And I went to an Irish lecture on Irish music, and the Irish expert said that the word gringo came from the Mexicans, who would hear the Irish in other areas, not just in Butte, singing "Green are the grasses." So it came green growth, because to them that's what it sounded like they were saying. This is a photograph of the Never Sweat. You can see the stacks are, where am I at?
The bed.
Yep, there we are. So those are the 7 stacks right there. You can see some of the remnants of the neighborhoods that were there. This is actually where the massacre took place. Throughout the testimony of Thomas Manning, who died from his wounds during this massacre, they talk a lot about these railroad tracks. And this is where, above the tracks, the mine guards stood when they opened fire on about, and estimates, the lowest number of the crowd was about 200. The highest number from testimony is 500. So I guess it just depended on where you were standing. The Never Sweat itself was a recognizable landmark to the immigrants. There are stories of immigrants just having a postcard, and they would show it at Ellis Island. And if they couldn't speak English, the people knew exactly where to send them, because they knew the 7 stacks were in Butte. Let's see. Oh, estimates too, again, probably depending on where you were standing, eyewitnesses. There were about 20 to 30 armed guards, or as they're called, company goons. So I'm going to call them company goons or just goons. They came out of the Never Sweat gates from above the tracks. So as you can see above the tracks there, there's a road that kind of veers off and up. That's where the Never Sweat gate is. There were company thugs who left the Hennessy building. And the Hennessy building, I know, is becoming popular in Butte history, but I think it's very underestimated just how much power the people in that building on that 6th floor had. Roy Alley, John Birkin, Colonel Stivers, and Joe Bodine all got into a machine. And the vernacular language in reading the inquest is amazing. They don't refer to automobiles or trucks as trucks and automobiles. They refer to them as machines. So these 4 guys left the Hennessy building. When they got in the machine, they drove up around, up by the Lex, and dropped down above the tracks and above where the mine guards were. This is a present view. We tried to approximate really close to where that other photograph was taken. Tom Malloy was a photographer for me. So this is really close, we think, to where that photograph was taken, and of course you can tell that it's really changed up there. The Never Sweat would basically be in the Berkeley pit right now. The vacuum truck, can you see the yellow vacuum truck? That right there is about where the railroad tracks, the crossings would have been. So you can tell it's been all recontoured and redone. This is a Sanborn map of the Anaconda Road, and we used it to try to determine where that photo was taken. You think that the photographer was standing right about here. I talked about the fusillade that was formed above the tracks. I'm not even going to try to pronounce this Finn's last name. I think it's Yolen, but I'm not sure. He testified that prior to the first shot, there was a man standing next to him that was taking photographs. And the guy basically snapped off a few photos, and one of the mine guards came over and said, "You son of a bitch," and hit him over the head. And then it was right about then when the shots were fired. This Yolen doesn't know what happened to him. because he immediately started running right after the first shots. So he doesn't know what happened to that man or to his camera. This is Tom had the Sanborn map put over an aerial. On the morning of the massacre, goons had been beating numerous picketers. And the picketers were striking a lot of mines throughout Butte, including the flats, the Parrott, the Belmont. So they were going throughout the town picketing. There was a lot of reports in the inquest that a lot of men went to the DA office, to the sheriff office, and complained that they had been beaten by mine guards, but it was basically brushed off. And when I read this and a few other sources, I really believe that the reach of the company was reaching into those offices, so they were being dismissed. During the strike, which occurred, or the massacre, probably about 4:30 p.m., but just prior to that, a machine loaded with scabs were getting off shift. They parted the crowd, but the crowd was actually really kind of calm. A few of them called them scabs, but they let them go through. There was no violence. And this is very important because even a lot of the police officers said they didn't see any justification for the mine guards opening fire on these strikers. This is Simon's boarding house. It's approximately 100 yards west of the railroad, where it was, the railroad crossings. The owner was Mrs. John Lowney, and she watched the strikers from the front door. When the shooting began, she ran to the second floor to find her two children. And it's very important to point this out about Simon's boarding house because in the main headlines after the massacre, they all said that the firing, the first shot came from the Simon's boarding house window, which is with this little X right there. And so that was almost like a justification for opening fire on the strikers. It was almost like it was self-defense. But Mrs. Lowney testified that when the shooting started, she ran upstairs to find her children, and that she would sleep. They also had a cook. They had a full-time cook, so these mine guards didn't even have to cook. It was in a mine yard surrounded by a wooden fence, and the guards' quarters was also surrounded by another wooden fence. The Anaconda Company owned its own private stock of shotguns, and these were stored at different mines throughout the town. D.G. Stivers testified that the ACM also owned rifles, and those were stored in the Hennessy building. Yeah, again, we talked about that. Patty O'Hearn. I just came across this very luckily. Patty O'Hearn was one of the mine guards, and he did testify during the inquest, and he testified that he shot in the air. He did have a shotgun. He was a specialized deputy, and this was a photo of him in May of 1914, so this is about 6 years prior to the massacre. He was scheduled to fight the Pride of Lewistown. Yeah, and I talked about he shot into the air. I believe this is the only known photo of any of the mine guards, but because John Birkin, and we'll talk about him in a little bit, was a sheriff of Butte. I'm sure there is a photo of John Birkin somewhere, I just haven't found it yet. John Birkin. In The Gibraltar of Unionism by Calvert, that's a really good book, and so is Yankee of the West by Burton K. Wheeler. He is referred to as a notorious gunman and a hothead. Dozens of the picketers, police officers, bystanders all testified seeing him beat different men with his rifle butt and chasing a lot of them into Simon's boarding house. He was previously appointed sheriff of Butte, Silverboe County in 1914. That's in Burton K. Wheeler's book. He instigated a physical confrontation with a picketer immediately prior to Roy Alley's first shot. So when the Roy Alley and his 3 other men showed up above the tracks, Roy Alley tried to start ordering, I guess would be the right word, IWW leader to disperse his crowd and to get off the Anaconda Road. And so there was this confrontation between them, and of course there's a lot of things going on. out in the peripheral and within the crowd. John Birkin started a fight, and it was right about when that fight started. Another man hit IWW Embry in the gut, knocked him to his knees, and it was right then when Roy Alley gave the signal for the mine guards to open fire on the crowd. And then he was so frenzied up, apparently, that he mistook a police officer, Haltonen, as a picketer. And he smashed him over the head with his rifle butt before he proceeded on to the next person that he was beating. He also testified he saw two men across Dublin Gulch with revolvers. Now, it's very possible, because there were bystanders all over, that there were bystanders over there, but no other witness testified that they saw anybody in Dublin Gulch with revolvers. John D. Ryan. He is the president of the Anaconda Copper Mining Company, as well as several others, including the Montana Power, was. He was fully apprised of everything that went on, and he did nothing to step in, and he also did not testify at the inquest. He was a lawyer. It has been rumored later that after Marcus Daly died, he started courting Mrs. Daly, Widow Daly. And I am biased against the company. I kind of grew up in that household. So in my view, this guy's a snake. Con Kelly. The Anaconda Company had a large legal department. And of course, you can imagine why. After inquest of men dying underground from unsafe conditions, the Anaconda Company is never found guilty. So this went on and on and on. So it had a very large legal department, and he was head of the legal counsel of that department. D.G. Stivers. He was the lawyer who headed the ACM Goon Squad. So if you want to see a hierarchy, it would go to Roy Alley, and then it would be this guy here, D.G. Stivers. He was another attorney. He was with Roy Alley at the top of the tracks when the shooting commenced. But he prepared a written memorandum that he read into the inquest, into the testimony. So he wasn't even testifying from memory or anything. It was a written memo that he read. I found that kind of, I don't know, unusual, I guess. At one point he got real testy when they were questioning him about John Birkin, and he said, "I have nothing to do with John Birkin." Well, he just rode up the hill with John Birkin and Roy Alley. He said he saw police officers shoot, but that was not substantiated by other eyewitness testimony. He said he saw two men in the crowd with pistols. That was not substantiated by anybody else. There was a lot of questioning on what kind of guns were used, and of course we know the company owned their own shotguns and they owned rifles, but the guards were encouraged to carry their own preference. He testified that he knew the guards were carrying 38s, 41s, 44s, and 45s. And Thomas Manning was shot with 32. So that's the only one that wasn't, not the only one, but was not part of that. I just stumbled upon this while I was aware of this short video years ago. But it was interesting because this was playing in Butte at the time of the massacre. And John O'Rourke, or Sheriff John O'Rourke, played Mr. Atherton in this film. So if you haven't seen this film, it's only 20 minutes long, I recommend it because now it's got even more significance. First of all, it shows, great footage, actual footage of the miners coming down the Anaconda Road. And during part of that, you can actually see a truck or a machine coming out of the Neversuet Gate. And also because now, you know, Sheriff John O'Rourke, in addition to being a sheriff, was apparently a movie star also.
And we have that here at the archives.
Oh, okay. There you go.
We don't check it out, but I could probably set you up. Or maybe we should show it for a brown bag.
There you go.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's another part of it, yeah.
I should start a list so I don't forget.
This was
Write it down.
the ads running in the newspapers at the time of A Romance of Butte, starring our Sheriff John O'Rourke. And Sheriff John O'Rourke actually ended up being the fall guy, I thought, in this testimony. It was very clear to me that everybody was pointing fingers. Roy Alley, D.G. Stivers all said that John O'Rourke had, I think that's the next slide, there he is. had jurisdiction over the mine guards because they were all specialized deputies. And during his testimony, a bunch of laughter broke out, so much that the coroner actually had to order silence in the courtroom. It was never indicated why people were laughing, but I just kind of think it's because of that film. I don't know. Yeah, and during his testimony, he said that he gave the command to shoot in the air, and that was substantiated by other witnesses, that they did hear him say that. In testimony after testimony of mine guards and specialized deputies, they all testified that following the massacre, they were summoned to the 6th floor of the Hennessy building by the Judge Dwyer. And I cannot find the judge's first name. Even in the inquest's listing of attorneys, it just says Judge Dwyer. So I think that the judge was coaching the mine guards in what to say. One of the attorneys in the inquest actually got frustrated. And he said, was there anybody that didn't go to see the judge? You know, and of course, nothing is answered on to that. He was on the 3rd Circuit before he openly became on the payroll. And I say that openly because Burton K. Wheeler and Yankee from the West, which is a great book, and so many of the names, I'd read that years ago, that mean a lot to me now. Because Burton K. Wheeler talks about a lot of these attorneys and a lot of these men that were involved in this. And he talks about how crooked they were before they even started working for the Anaconda Company. Yankee from the West. He went on to become a U.S. Senator, and his stories are great about how he ended up in Butte and how he ended up to be a lawyer in Butte. He litigated hundreds of lawsuits on behalf of the miners and others in Butte. He was actually, I believe, for the underdog. I think during this time period, he would probably be a hero. And again, yeah, deceptive practices by their lawyers. Roy Alley. He was the private secretary to ACM President John Ryan. He was head of, underneath, the Goon Squad. In witness Arvilla's testimony, prior to the first shot, he heard Roy Alley say, go get the sons of bitches, shoot them down, shoot down the sons of bitches. And he saw Arvilla, and this has been substantiated by the witness testimony. Roy Alley raised his hand in the air the first time nothing happened. He did it again, and then that's when the guards all started firing. The goons had set up a fusillade along the railroad tracks, so it was a line of firing. Prior to, on April 19th, and this is a very famous story of Roy Alley. He was in the Thornton Building barbershop, and he was overheard saying, we need some more killings and hangings here. And if there were any red-blooded Americans in this camp, it would be done. A few years later, Alley got crosswise with the company over a patent. I think it was over drill bits, but I need to research that more. And he went to Burton K. Wheeler. And the company was doing everything to get rid of Burton K. Wheeler. Now, Roy Alley, when he needed a lawyer against the company, goes to Burton K. Wheeler. So, during this discussion and negotiation, Roy Alley disclosed to Burton K. Wheeler which Montana newspapers were owned by the Anaconda Company, which politicians it manipulated, and that Hudson, who was head of the Machinists Union, was a Pinkerton agent in disguise. Pinkertons were big in Butte, field detectives were big in Butte. That's one of my slides. There were several, and they were discussed in the testimony. But of course, everybody was very close-mouthed. They didn't disclose any of that information during the testimony. Sam Embry, he was a national IWW leader and labor organizer. He stood toe-to-toe basically with Roy Alley. And when this ordering was going on, I failed to mention too that during this time, they were trying to get the crowd off the road. And a lot of the men had brought their statements, tax statements, properties tax statements. So their countering argument was they had every right to be on the road, because the Anaconda Company was saying it was private property. So the picketers are saying, no, it's a public property, we have every right to be here, we all paid our property taxes. Thomas Manning was very close to John O'Rourke when he got shot, and he was one of them that was seen with his paper trying to make that argument. Embry was also a victim of the Bisbee deportation by Phelps Dodge Mining Company. Phelps Dodge goons and their Pinkertons kidnapped thousands of IWW out of their homes by gunpoint in the night. They loaded them onto cattle cars and took them to Columbus, New Mexico in the desert without food or water. Federal troops arrived to assist the miners, differentiating that from the event in Butte, as the troops here in Butte were here to assist the ACM. And of course, this is because of sedition. He wrote in the February 18th Industrial Worker, we want 10,000 members in Butte to abolish the rustling cart without a strike. Be one of them. But of course that didn't happen, and they went on to strike. John Heikkila was also a part of that Bisbee deportation. He was kidnapped from his home, leaving his wife and small children. One was a newborn. They only had a few dollars. He didn't return to Bisbee, but he later met up with his wife, and then they came to Butte. So I feel sorry for this poor bastard, because he ended up on the poor end with Phelps Dodge. He came up here, and then he ends up on the poor end in another major event here in Butte. Detective agencies. I think a lot of these are glorified, in my opinion, and I know there was a show on the History Channel on Pinkertons. I didn't watch it, just for that reason. In my book, these guys are not to be glorified. These are some spies, they're still pigeons. It's known that the ACM hired them to infiltrate the unions, to serve as spies and union agitators. The company knew immediately what the unions were discussing and planning. I mean, just in a couple of slides before, it showed where Hudson was a Pinkerton, and he was a union leader. He testified that the IWW did not bother to send any strike notice to the ACM, because they knew the company was already apprised of what the union was planning and of all the union activities. Known private detective agencies hired by the ACM were Pinkerton and Thiel. Those two are talked about in the inquest. And Burns and Templeton are talked about in Burt K. Wheeler's book and the Duval. This is the attorney's list for the state: Mr. Frank Riley, Mr. Oh, there's a typo, Mick McDaniel, Mr. Downey, Mr. Meyer. And then for the Manning family is Louis Donovan and Timothy Nolan, and these are two of the attorneys who were getting very frustrated throughout the inquest. Messrs. Walker and Walker. One of these Walkers later went on to become Postmaster General. I believe it's Broadway. It ends up going one way, but there's a big home over there, and there's a historical plaque on that house, on that mansion, and it talks about one of these attorneys for the ACM. D.G. Stivers, Dan Kelly, of course, Kelly Mine. Of course, J.D. Ryan, later on the Ryan Dam, George Birkin. This is a list of the men shot in the back. I did not list where they were shot on their bodies, just because that's an extensive list. Several of them were shot twice. James Sullivan was shot in the spine, paralyzed immediately. He laid on the railroad tracks. He was unable to move. The weapons used, of course, shotguns, rifles, sawed-off shotguns, revolvers, saps, which is basically a billy stick, blackjacks. I think that museum in Peaburg on the police museum have a couple of blackjacks. And a Humane Club, I'd never heard of this one. And there was only one discussed in the testimony, and it's basically a steel club that is paper mache over to minimize bruising. So it's really nice that they thought of that. There was no estimate on the number of the snipers behind the strike fence. There is no accurate count of the picketers beaten, and most, of course, fled. The jurors list. There is an R.J. Dwyer here. I have no clue if this guy might be related to the judge. The coroner was John Dorn. And on the last day of the inquest, the coroner closed it in the courthouse and said that all interested parties were welcome to go to St. James Hospital, where they questioned John McCarthy and Jim Sullivan in their hospital beds. Of course, Jim Sullivan was the one whose spinal cord was severed. Both gave testimony that they were both shot running away in the back. After that, the inquest was officially closed at St. James Hospital. This is a list of the strike demands. I'm not going to read them all. I took quotes. I didn't type everything. These are just small quotes that I took out of them. The industrial political prisoners to be released. Mountjoy political prisoners. Of course, what's going on in Ireland at this time. The Irish Revolution, the Irish Civil War. Mountjoy was one of the prisons where a lot of the Irish political prisoners were housed. 6 days from collar to collar. The mine shaft is called, the top of the mine shaft is called the collar. So they want a 6-hour day going down and coming up. So they want to be their lunch break, I guess, too. Minimum wage scale, the abolition of the wrestling card, and the contract and bonus efficiency system. I really like this quote at the very bottom here. 2 miners on a machine is the dope, and that's actually that's quoted out of their documents. Some of the exhibits that are actually really interesting, the whole Communist Manifesto. There's a lot of back and forth going between the lawyers in the inquest. The ACM lawyers just wanted excerpts taken out of the Communist Manifesto, and the other attorneys said, if you're going to take excerpts, you're going to read the whole thing. So the whole Communist Manifesto was read into the inquest. Sabotage was an IWW publication, the revolutionary IWW, Solidarity, Industrial Communism, and the 32 bullet that was removed from Banning. But that's been lost. It was not with the inquest. And after several days of testimony, which lasted from April 29th to May 13th, from about 100 witnesses, no one was ever named as the murderer of Thomas Manning. So once again, the company gets away with another, with more injustice. Mrs. Doherty, I love this woman. She has one of the longest testimonies in the inquest. You can tell she's right from Ireland. Her maiden name was spelled differently from her maiden name. Her father fought in the Civil War as part of the Fighting 69. She lived on the road. She ran a boarding house. And she was married. Her husband was an IWW member. So they were really pressing her, the ACM lawyers. And they really wanted to know if she was partial to the IWW, because she gave a lot of damning testimony about what she saw. And she said that at one point, one of the lawyers, it was basically a direct question, you're on the side of, and her quote was, I am on the side of anyone who's being beaten. And this woman was feisty. She kept saying, I'm not afraid of the ACM, I'm not afraid of their guards, I'm not afraid of any of them. Once again, she didn't give her first name. And what really struck me after reading part of her testimony, and again, the women put such a human touch on this, because you can read books about this, it's included in different books, but this gives real human accounts, that the women are up there looking for their kids. But she also said, and as you can imagine, so all these neighborhood kids are all around, they're watching this going on. And she said that after the smoke had cleared and a lot of the men cleared out, a lot of the neighborhood boys went over and were picking up the miners' hats that had fallen off their heads as they were running away. Yeah. So, contrast of worlds. This is President John D. Ryan's ex-residence on Excelsior Street. And that is Thomas Manning's unmarked grave at Holy Cross Cemetery. And I guess I'm done. Wow, I did it. Okay. Any questions?
It's just amazing what they've been through, it's just.
Oh, yeah. The struggle between labor and bad capitalism, yeah.
So Julie, when Mr. Stivers submitted his testimony, and he omitted the .32 caliber, had he already had some information?
Oh, definitely.
Okay.
Yeah.
And could they, there was no way to ever prove that?
And, you know, I'm looking through the